All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to have the highly coveted nap time slot. It was good for me, get up and stretch my legs. So if anyone needs to get up and stretch out, I won't think that's weird or unusual at all. A little bit of background, actually Natalie talked a little bit about it. So I represent the Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command. We are, unlike the other services, the Navy does two things a little bit differently. One, we centralize all of our defense efforts, right? So we have one CNDSP, and that is NCDOC. So where a lot of the decentralization in the other services is really beneficial to a lot for most of those organizations from the Navy's perspective, because we really had to tackle how we handle defense on our networks. We had to centralize it because, unlike the other services, we have big chunks of the network that literally move around the globe all the time, right? So we have, and Mr. Asante talked about it earlier, the ICS threat, right? Industrial control systems. Really, for the Navy, those pieces of our network are large interconnected industrial control systems, right? And they connect back into NIPRNet systems and SIPRNet systems. So kind of an interesting challenge for the Navy. So we had to globalize all of our networks, and how we handle it from a defense side is we centralized our defense efforts. Also, unlike the other services, we separate protect and defend. So again, Mr. Asante talked about how he mentioned cyber protection teams. Now, he didn't like the term protect. He really thought of it more as a defense effort and really building defensible networks. That's something that we do in the Navy, is we kind of split the two up. So we have Navy Net Warfare Command. They really handle all of the protection side. So they're responsible for compliance and patching and infrastructure and things like that. NMCI, supporting NMCI. At NCDOC, we handle the defense side, which is really kind of a unique breakout. It's beneficial to us because we can focus on the threat. We can focus on what the capabilities, the TTPs of those threat actors are, what their intent is. Try and get as far left. So our big, phrase around our command is left of boom. How do we really get left of boom, right? So in the cyber realm, that's not just getting ahead of exploits, but really understanding, what are the things, the rules of engagement, the doctrinal aspects of our enemies that really drive where they're going to move in offensive cyber operations. So for us, actually having this split between defense and protect allows us to really focus on those kinds of things. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about NIPRNet as a weapon system, right? So we hear this conversation all the time. We hear we must operate our network as a weapon system. So we hear it from the top down. We hear it across. We hear it from different services. Everyone's talking about we must treat it like a weapon system. Well, what is a weapon system? A weapon system is really any integrated system that's often integrated through some form of command and control, electronics or computer systems, that supports the operations and maneuver of any type of weapon, really. So in a lot of ways, the NIPRNet is that, right? We don't think, most of the weapons that we have, especially on the ships, they're really on isolated, secret or SAP type networks. But what about all the operators that do that? What about the organizational plans, the actual design and controls? Most of that stuff is not done in-house. It's done by contractors. We communicate with those contractors via the NIPRNet, right? They don't have, in many cases, don't have access to SIPRNet. A lot of the research and education is done by folks, the national laboratories, and folks who sit on the DREN, right, the Defense Research and Education Network. In some cases, they have SIPRNet access. In most cases, the majority of them only have NIPRNet access, right? It's not like, some of us may have a SIPR terminal and a NIPR terminal at our desk, or in my case, SIPR, NIPR, and high-side access at my desk. At the research labs, they don't necessarily have that. They have like a SIPR terminal, across the building that they have access to, maybe an hour a week, something like that, right? So most of the communication we do over NIPRNet. And then, of course, there's all the PII and PHI information. So we have NAVMed and BUMED and all the other medical networks where all the PHI is stored. All that stuff is on NIPRNet, right? So at the same time, we also use NIPRNet for Facebook, YouTube, Netflix, Tumblr, all sorts of webmail, all sorts of stuff like that, that pokes all sorts of holes in our network and allows our adversaries to capitalize on those efforts. So looking at the weapon system piece, right? So we use it for strategic messaging, operational planning, all sorts of things like that. And when we talk about the network as a weapon system, we don't often think of it in terms of other weapon systems. So I have a video that I'm going to talk over. I took the sound out so I could actually talk. But look at some of the stuff that's going on at this time. This is actually a video from San Diego in 1995. There was a man named Sean Nelson. He took an M60A3 Patton main battle tank from the San Diego National Guard Armory and took it for a 23-minute joyride throughout San Diego. Ran over a bunch of cars, smashed through an RV, took out a bunch of fire hydrants, all sorts of personal property, tore up the streets, tore up some corporate infrastructure and things like that. Actually tried to take out a bridge, smashed into the support structures for the bridge multiple times, realized it wasn't working, backed out, ended up trying to cross over the highway into oncoming traffic, got stuck in a median. People remember this very blatant, bizarre misuse of a weapon system. But we think about something like this rather than the misuse of NIPRNet on a daily basis, right? But I'm here to argue that the misuse of NIPRNet is far more pervasive, far more damaging to the nation, and far more expensive than what Mr. Sean Nelson did, right? And I can really only speak for the Navy because I don't have access to what Army users are doing, and I don't really have access to what Air Force users are doing. But I would venture to guess that based on the conversations that have already happened today, both on stage and kind of point to point throughout the day, and also interactions I've had with folks at the 24th Air Force, that this is a problem across the services. This is not just a Navy-only problem. So I'm going to put some numbers up on the board. Those numbers are associated with, I'll say, misuse of weapon systems, right? Which one of those numbers, 500 mil down to about 150,000, do you think was associated with Mr. Sean Nelson's rampage in San Diego? What's this? I heard, it sounded like somebody said 70 mil in there. Well, I'm going to show you exactly what they are here. Oh, it's supposed to click. There it is. So if we look at those numbers, the 500 mil is actually on the low end what is estimated the cost of the OPM breaches. That's just mitigation and response, cleanup, credit monitoring, things like that. That doesn't include costs going forward as far as the increased cost related to investigations, for example. So now for somebody to get a TS clearance, it costs significantly more than it did 5 years ago. They have to go, the investigators have to go, well, they're revamping the whole investigation process as well, but they have to go point to point with everybody that's your reference, everybody that you reference in your SF-86. So 500 mil, that's expensive. It's about 21.5 million SF-86s that were lifted, and they're hanging out in China. And then, of course, other data that was also lifted during a separate OPM breach. So the second one down there was what the U.S. Navy spends on bandwidth costs per year, and that number goes up every single year. So 116 million just on bandwidth costs. I'll show you a slide in a little bit that talks about how much we spend on non-mission related costs that comes out of that number there. 160 million is what we spend approximately on incident response cleanup costs per year. And that includes the equipment costs, the manpower costs, and the actual the cleanup efforts and things. That includes named operations, malware infection, not caused through negligent use, and things like that. The number right below that, 70 mil, is just what we've estimated for negligent use only. And when we say negligent use, it doesn't necessarily mean stuff that goes against the acceptable use policy. It's stuff that people shouldn't be doing, but we actually give them the ability to do and screw up on a daily basis, right? So we give people enough, I guess, rope to hang themselves is a way to think about it. And then we're forced to clean up after it, right? And we get mad and they get counseled. But really what it is when you can think of it like negligent use, you can think of it as similar to a negligent discharge. I asked the question, can you imagine spending 70 million per year in your organization just cleaning up negligent discharges? It's kind of a scary number when you think about it in that way, right? So we talk about negligent discharge, and we give people weapons, we give them bullets, tell them and we expect them to operate them in an acceptable fashion, but we can't always guarantee that they will. It's the same thing with the network, right? So here's some of the things that we see when we go back through our network logs, some of the stuff that we look at, and we see, okay, these are all the ways in which we're using the NIPRNet. Obviously, pornography is on there. You would say, well, that's weird. You should be blocking all that. Well, there's this website that we allow open for people for MWR purposes called Tumblr. Tumblr is a blog service, but it is pretty much a mecca for pornography, but it's not classified as an adult site. But it essentially exists as a way for people to post pornographic pictures and pornographic GIFs and videos and things like that. And we see Tumblr traffic. If you do a poll on Navy sensors alone just for Tumblr, you'd be shocked and amazed at the names of some of the sub-sites, right, the Tumblr blogs that you see up there. Oops. It's actually quite scary. I'm not, and I don't feel, I would tell you some of them, but I really don't feel comfortable saying them out loud. So, let's see. Oh, so I mentioned on the last slide that I would share some numbers with you as far as how much is mission related and how much is not out of that 116 million that we spend every year. So we've estimated, based on information that we've gotten from DISA and some of our own data pulls on our network, that at least 45% of Navy web traffic is likely non-malicious, right? There's a lot of stuff that's very obviously not non-malicious, non-mission related. There's some stuff that is very obviously not mission related, but we assess that at least 45% is non-mission related. That includes things like YouTube traffic, which some of it might be mission related. Somebody could be going out and getting some training videos, but more than likely not, they're watching cat videos and squirrel videos and things like that. We also include Pandora and other streaming services like that. It's very hard to estimate. So what does that mean for the Navy? That we spend approximately $50 million per year making sure that Navy sailors are entertained while they're working. And not just sailors, civilians as well, and contractors. So how do adversaries leverage that, right? We have all sorts of problems with this model. The fact that we have webmail open and other services that use SSL means that we can have all these layers of defense, and we do, but they punch holes in it. They bury tunnels, or dig tunnels underneath all of those layers of defense, right? So, you have the Donald Trump, build a wall on the border model. Well, SSL is a crazy tunnel. It starts at a place that you would never imagine and ends up in a place that you would never imagine. You have no visibility into it, and it totally bypasses your defensive wall. No matter how many layers of barbed wire you put in there, no matter how high or how tall your wall is, those SSL tunnels are problematic for us. We don't have break and inspect capabilities in the Navy. They're talking about it going forward, but not just at the Navy level, but at the joint level, right, with JIE. But can you imagine the bandwidth that we're going to need to be able to pull that off? And the extra resources and storage for that kind of information. I mean, the cost is going to be outrageous. I don't see it really happening anytime soon. We have issues like hammer toss, so we allow access to social networking sites. Hammer toss was a Russian APT mechanism where they used Twitter as a C2 node. It looked like very legitimate tweets. They had things like an image file out to GitHub and a hashtags and like 123 cyber. So an infected computer goes out to Twitter. It looks for a handle, a very specific handle as programmed into the malware. It sees the image file. It goes out to GitHub. It pulls the image, and the hashtag tells it how many bytes to offset and which characters to add to its decryption code so it can read the C2 commands. It looks like a very legitimate tweet, and it's very modular. It's very malleable. It changes every day. The malware will go out on a daily basis, go out to a specific username that it's supposed to go to, check and see if it sees something, it follows the directions. If it doesn't see it, it waits 24 hours and it does the same thing looking for its next set of orders. How do you block something like that? How do you allow access to Twitter but not to those specific Twitter handles? You can't, right? So what you have to be able to do is whitelist activity. So even if you whitelist Twitter, you're not allowing blacklist, you're not trying to blacklist bad sites, you're just automatically, they're denied the C2 infrastructure in the back end, right? So we can't compete with hammer toss. Similarly to SSL, you have a lot of our adversaries are using encrypted C2. Black Coffee worked very similar to hammer toss. Instead of Russian, it was Chinese. It was APT-17, and they used compromised Microsoft TechNet sites. They used an @ symbol, @Microsoft, and then a string of 8 characters in corporation. That string of 8 characters was essentially encoded IP address information for their C2. And all it was a post on Microsoft TechNet. I challenge all you guys to go out and block TechNet on your network and see how many of your ITs and infrastructure support guys come to you and start complaining. TechNet is an incredibly valuable site for most of us, right? Especially on the infrastructure side, we'd be lost without it. We've seen efforts for tracking ship and troop movement, through corrupted smart devices, right? So if an adversary can get you to download and install something on your phone and it uses geolocation data, they can actually start to track, and they get enough people in the service, they can start to track that movement around. And depending on the adversary, that's extremely important to them, right? Depending on what their purposes are, their biggest care as an organization, right? So we see DoD targeted social engineering efforts all the time, and the thing is, we allow it, right? I mean, you can't have your sailors and your server and your service members without access to Facebook. But what are we doing to block that stuff? So this is what our proposal is. We call it TRON, Transfer Risk Off of NIPRNet. Really what it means is, you take all of your mission focus areas, right? All the stuff that we know is mission specific, and you isolate it from all the stuff that's likely non-malicious. Because we're not going to block access to Facebook and things like that for users, especially those that are deployed. We need to keep that stuff open. So what we do is we isolate it from NIPRNet, and we virtualize a connection to a third-party provider. You transfer all of the risk to that third-party provider. We have access to Amazon Web Services nowadays, right? We have access to Revelo systems and other outside vendors who are already doing this. A lot of the national labs have solutions in place already. Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, for example, out in California, they have a VPN client that you can log into through your browser. You VPN directly to them, and now you connect to the internet through their product, right? So you have three major benefits to that. You've reduced risk on NIPRNet. Now you can actually whitelist on NIPRNet effectively, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to have access to this academia site, right? So this college or this outside organization. If you can't get to it on NIPRNet, you just go through your VPN client, and you do it through that third-party provider. You've also, so as a byproduct of reducing risk and being able to whitelist, you've actually reduced a significant amount of noise on your network. And now you actually have legitimate hunt capabilities that you're not sifting through exploit kit activity. You're not sifting through just the kind of crap that comes up from adware and spyware. The Navy moved a little bit closer to this model in the summer of last year when we actually convinced our folks up at Tier 1 to block all advertisements, just advertisements in general at Tier 1. We saw like an 80% decrease in exploit kit activity like that. Significantly reduce the amount of noise. And we have a very good SIM, a very good model, our mission system. We use Splunk for analytics, and we're able to sift through large amounts of data very quickly. But having that reduction in noise just on the CRIM side is critical for us, right? There's just millions and millions and millions of alerts on a daily basis. I don't have enough people to go through all of those alerts. In any way that I can reduce the noise, it's going to improve my hunt capabilities. Now I can focus on and worry about and really get a good assessment much more quickly on legitimate threats to my network. I don't have to worry about this worm or that spy bot, something that maybe looks really bad because it's calling out to Chinese infrastructure or it's calling out to Russian infrastructure or something like that. And it takes days and multiple people and different groups working together. My stovepipes, I had to get my silos to collaborate with each other, right? It takes a lot of effort to do that. If I can reduce the noise on my network, then that becomes a lot more manageable. It's a streamlined process. And as an unintended byproduct, you have managed attribution. So now I'm not going out. If I need to go out and research malware, and that malware is associated with an APT group, maybe I don't know that it's associated with an APT group, but I'm doing research on the C2 infrastructure or malware, and I'm doing it from NIPRNet. I have there is the risk that I'm going to infect my system, of course, but there's also the risk that the adversary is going to get smart. That I'm starting to look at stuff that's in my sensor grid. Now I'm going out on NIPRNet and doing some research on it. And I go, oh, this is coming from a DoD source. They know about this malware that I have on their system. Or they're getting smart on the C2 that we're using. So now it allows them to shift. If we have managed attribution system through a third-party provider, it actually makes it much more difficult to point that back at the Navy or the Army or any DoD services. So it's a big benefit for us to be able to transfer that. So this morning, General Fogarty, you mentioned that we can't approach problems traditionally with the narrow-minded, the way that we've been doing it, right? Cyber problems. We have to be able to maneuver quickly. And then there were a lot of, Major, you had the acquisition slide up there that nobody could read, and you're standing right here and you couldn't read it. If we stick with the model that we have and we try to put a managed attribution system in place for this, or you set up a separate network to do it, we're always going to be behind the ball. You have to do all the acquisition. You have to send everything through a change management process. If you can transfer to a third-party provider and then actually legitimately lock down your system, you don't have to worry about making those kinds of going through that acquisition cycle. You shift all that stuff over to the vendor. And as Dan, you mentioned earlier about the cloud service provider, if you use a legitimate cloud service provider, then on a breach side, you're actually much more less likely to get breached, right? So I didn't even realize that when you put those numbers up earlier, and you were talking about all the breaches that were going on, and none of them were related to cloud service providers. We don't think of it that way, but this is essentially what we're doing. We're using internet through the cloud, and security is there for the cloud service providers. So I would challenge you guys to take that with you. It is a disruptive model going forward, right, to tell people, no, you're not going to be able to use NIPRNet anymore, like the way you're using it, right? It breeds accountability for their actions. You're changing the way people are thinking about NIPRNet. This is legitimately a weapon. If we're going to start calling it a weapon, if we're going to continue to call it a weapon system, we need to start acting like it. So transfer that to a third-party provider, let them handle it. And, it's a culture disruption thing, but I would challenge you guys all to take this with you and help fight the fight in the Army alongside the Navy. The Air Force, by the way, is doing the same thing. 24th Air Force has put together a package. They're hitting it from a legal perspective more so than we're hitting it from a DCO, Defensive Cyber Operations perspective. But let's join hands and go at the problem together. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. So unless anybody has any questions, that's all I got. Yes, sir.
So what's the response of the workforce been? So and the level of perceived disruption to your average user. What's their feedback?
So it's interesting. So the biggest pushback we've had was on the Navy side has been like, well, we can't take this stuff away from our deployed sailors, right? Our deployed troops. When you go back and look at the plurality of traffic that is problematic, it's all happening shoreside. So what's interesting is for the sailors that are on aboard ships, they're limited by bandwidth restrictions, right? Everything's going through Milsat and other things, and so they have very limited bandwidth. They're on duty for many more hours per day than the average shore sailor is. And they really kind of restrict themselves, and the commander actually has the opportunity to go into restricted comms. The focus is different, right? They're in that battlefield mindset. So we've had literally no pushback from deployed sailors. Leadership has said we can't take it away from the deployed sailors, but when we look at the data, it's all on the shore side. We haven't had, once we point that out, no one's really come back and said, well, we need to have Facebook access and Twitter access for the shore-based sailor. We have at NCDOC, we're an accepted network, so we're not on NMCI. We have a significantly restricted network compared to NMCI. And the way we handle it, we actually have a separate LAN for research, malware research and things like that. And I think culture-wise, we have a pretty good handle on it. I think in the DCO community, they get it. It'll be interesting to see how it spreads outside of the DCO community. I haven't really had a lot of experience with the other commands, so I can't really speak to very specifically like this group of sailors. This rate doesn't like it or this one does. But I can say on the DCO side, they're very supportive. They understand it. In fact, the biggest push for us is that we need the access to the LAN to do malware research and detonation. That's really what everybody wants it for. Obviously, you can't detonate malware on NIPRNet, but we need to test our countermeasures. So we need to be able to do that. So, that's the biggest. It's actually been a push to get something like this so we can fire malware off on purpose. So I'll let you guys have to triage the.
So have you guys done some return on investment analysis? What were your costs? Where are you saving? What is the lead up and infrastructure timeline? Anything like that?
I have not personally. I know that we have some folks that have been looking into it that are at our command that are on the N6, the infrastructure side of the house. And I know from the few options that we've looked at, I'm really focusing a lot on the managed attribution side. It is significantly cheaper to do it through a cloud service provider than $70 million per year, which is our negligent cost cleanup, right? So it's only a couple $1,000s per month. It's only I think it's a couple $1,000s per year for our command to do the managed attribution through Amazon Web Services if we wanted to go that route. Right? So Navy-wide, I would imagine, it's going to cost us a couple mil, but if we can prove that we can save the money from 116 million in bandwidth costs, we can reduce that number significantly, and then we can reduce the cleanup costs significantly. The payoff would be that we're saving the Navy millions of dollars per year.
Is the Navy taking a stepwise approach to this, or are they all in right now?
This is a grassroots effort at this point. We've gotten a lot of pushback, but it's an NCDOC is trying to get the ball rolling. But Yeah, it's not a Navy-wide effort at this point.
Yes, sir. How are you handling authentication and identity on this other network?
So right now, it's the managed attribution network has no authentication. So we have it is done through manual oversight. So we have SOPs and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not authorities. My mind's drawing a blank. But we have a lot of oversight at the division level, right? So we're broken up into different divisions within the command, divisions within each department, and only certain divisions have access to that LAN. One of them is the Open Source Research Division, which I mentioned earlier. So we actually have custom boxes, and to do what they do, they're the only ones that really go out and do deep web analysis and dark web research. There's a very small group, and they have very strict procedures by which they operate, and very strict rules by which they're allowed to operate. Not allowed to log into anything. We're not allowed to run personas, things like that. So as far as the other teams go, it's on the leadership for that team to actually, for that division to manage, like, how are they using that access and stuff like that. So we do it through just oversight, directly. Because again, even when we started doing, like, we couldn't do like CAC authentication, for example. Now you lose managed attribution. So.
For the managed attribution, are you talking about doing it in terms of there's a manual thing that folks will, on purpose go and say, I'll go look over here and do this for this, whereas the other things will be there? And then just the second part of it, in terms of segregating and virtualizing traffic, are you looking into things like software-defined networking in order to do the sort of workload changes and things like that?
So the first piece, the managed attribution piece, is that it's really, we get it as a byproduct of using the service this way. Right now, we have to deliberately go out and essentially ensure that we are doing as much non-attribution on the manual side. So the Open Source Research Division has processes and procedures by which they operate in a managed attribution fashion, but we don't have a true managed attribution solution right now. On the other side, the model that we're looking at right now through Lawrence Livermore Labs is actually through it's a web application. So we log we VPN into them through a web application. So we'd essentially whitelist our network. They would be one of the folks that are on the whitelist because it's a national laboratory, so they'd be on the whitelist anyway. But then we log in through them, and then everything is done through that. It's essentially a proxy service. So we're proxied through Lawrence Livermore. Right, there's a lot of them out there. The problem is right now is that a lot of people have them. No one's really forcing their use, and at the same time, even if we are, because we're using different solutions right now, or piloting them, but we still haven't locked down NIPRNet the way it ought to be. So you have to move, you actually have to transfer the risk to this third-party provider. It's not just, go out and use this as your web search engine. You have to literally take the next step and say, okay, I'm going to transfer all of the non-mission stuff over to them, and I'm going to lock down my mission system, and it's going to be mission only, and that's it.
Just a real quick question. So if they go into the managed attribution portion, are you going to have any type of oversight on that, or is it just going to be the wild west on that?
Well, that would be up to local commands to figure out. From our perspective, like I said, we have very specific, SOPs by which you do specific types of research. So for us, as the CNDSP, we actually have requirements to go out and do specific types of research. So you have to make the split between what's managed attribution. You can't log into your Facebook account via that service, right? Because now you've given up the attribution piece, right? You're not non-attrib anymore. So you do have to set very specific guidelines. There may be certain things that you can, certain software solutions that you can put in place that say, okay, if you're going to go through the managed attribution piece here, this is a separate app that you go through that handles it for you essentially, right? And then all other research is done here, whether you're going to YouTube or logging into your Gmail account, that kind of thing. But that has to be a separate solution. Yeah, absolutely. So everything is done essentially virtually, so you can set up your virtual connection however you want. And you can actually put the onus on the third-party provider, especially if you're going through national laboratory, right? They have solutions for this already, but they can engineer new solutions if it doesn't meet your needs specifically. Say, okay, I want to do this, this separate thing here.
And then why haven't you locked down since you have the ability, you have an alternative location for them to go to?
So we have at NCDoc, we are actually significantly locked down compared to the rest of the DoD, really. But we haven't fully implemented this model either. So we don't get to, like I said earlier, we divide, protect, and defend. So I don't get to control from NCDOC what the Navy networks are doing. I can influence, but I don't get to make that decision. Navy-wide, we're going to do this. We're going to move in this fashion, right? So, and that's Navy Net Warfare Command, NetWarCom, and also directed by 10th Fleet, with buy-in from a lot of other people.
What I was going to go somewhat down the same road of Lieutenant Colonel Lanham calling from West Point, as a matter of fact. So what I was going to ask is the non-traditional soldier populations or sailor populations. So your soldiers in your education pipelines and your other soldiers that are using Navy-provided networks. Would this solution work for those disparate audiences? So the Navy hospital corpsmen that are on NIPRNet, but also doing PHI material handling, et cetera.
Well, so all of the stuff that's actually mission related, so PHI, all that stuff should be a part of your mission system, right? So you don't want to necessarily have all your PHI off on a separate system that, again, you're using for Facebook and Google and YouTube and Tumblr and all that stuff. So you want to have it on NIPRNet where you can, because that's where you're going to have all your solutions, all your security solutions in place. So it's going to run through it's going to be protected by your layers of defense. It's going to be, we're going to be able to do analysis on it through our cyber defense mission support system, things like that. Which we do, we have that responsibility now. It's just the PHI, the responsibilities of the organization that handle PHI it's all lost. Their traffic is lost amidst the noise with everybody else's. So I would argue that we don't want to isolate them. They may need to be isolated in their own network, but it's not going to be this particular network, right? So they would essentially have the same system or the same setup there, that their mission system that handles PHI, that handles all sorts of patient data and PII, is going to be separate from the system that they use for MWR and other resources, or other purposes, I should say. Anything else? So I have some cards with me. I'm happy to go point to point with anybody. And we have I don't know, those of you who have high-set access, we actually posted an article on our iSpace page, which you can get to from JWIX and NSANet. So if you are interested in that, take a card from me, and we have more information available. I'm happy to chat with anybody.
So Randy, we are so excited you came today and talked to us about this. So, though I have to say I was a little disappointed sitting in the audience. I really expected to have a Tron reference or a Tron movie clip. I mean, don't get me wrong, like the tank was awesome, but it's Tron.
There's a Tron picture.
There's a Tron, yeah, but
I used the color scheme from Tron too. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll give you that. So we would like to present the coveted ACI black badge, and it says Beat Navy, so I insist that you wear this around the office often.
I don't think I can bring that in a skiff though, so.
Details. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.